So today we're going to be talking about Kamma and Cessation. And today we're going to be reading first and foremost 4 different suttas, but they're all from either the Anguttara Nikaya, the numerical discourses, or the Samyutta Nikaya, the connected discourses. And 3 of them are relatively short, so it's not going to probably take a lot of time. But it's important to read all of these suttas to get a framework of an understanding into Kamma and the notions related to Kamma within the Buddha's dispensation. So I'm going to start with this one, which is in the numerical discourses, and it's in the Book of the Sixes, and it's number 9 in that book, and it's called Penetrative. So I will begin. Bhikkhus, I will teach you a penetrative exposition of the Dhamma. Listen and attend closely, I will speak. Yes, Bhante, those bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this, and what, bhikkhus, is the penetrative exposition of the Dhamma? Sensual pleasures should be understood. The source and origin of sensual pleasures should be understood. The diversity of sensual pleasures should be understood. The result of sensual pleasures should be understood. The cessation of sensual pleasures should be understood. The way leading to the cessation of sensual pleasures should be understood. Feelings should be understood. The source and origin of feelings should be understood. The diversity of feelings should be understood. The result of feelings should be understood. The cessation of feelings should be understood. The way leading to the cessation of feelings should be understood. Perceptions should be understood. The source and origin of perceptions should be understood. The diversity of perceptions should be understood. The result of perceptions should be understood. The cessation of perceptions should be understood. The way leading to the cessation of perceptions should be understood. The taints should be understood. The source and origin of the taints should be understood. The diversity of the taints should be understood. The result of the taints should be understood. The cessation of the taints should be understood. The way leading to the cessation of the taints should be understood. Kamma should be understood. The source and origin of Kamma should be understood. The diversity of Kamma should be understood. The result of Kamma should be understood. The cessation of Kamma should be understood. The way leading to the cessation of Kamma should be understood. Suffering should be understood. The source and origin of suffering should be understood. The diversity of suffering should be understood. The result of suffering should be understood. The cessation of suffering should be understood. The way leading to the cessation of suffering should be understood. When it was said, sensual pleasures should be understood, the source and origin of sensual pleasures should be understood. The diversity of sensual pleasures should be understood. The result of sensual pleasures should be understood. The cessation of sensual pleasures should be understood. The way leading to the cessation of sensual pleasures should be understood. For what reason was this said? There are, bhikkhus, these 5 objects of sensual pleasure. forms cognizable by the eye that are wished for, desired, agreeable, pleasing, connected with sensual pleasure, and tantalizing. Sounds cognizable by the ear, odors cognizable by the nose, tastes cognizable by the tongue, tactile objects cognizable by the body that are wished for, desired, agreeable, pleasing, connected with sensual pleasure, and tantalizing. However, these are not sensual pleasures. In the Noble One's discipline, these are called objects of sensual pleasure. A person's sensual pleasure is their lustful intention. They are not sensual pleasures, the pretty things in the world. A person's sensual pleasure is their lustful intention. The pretty things remain just as they are in the world, but the wise remove the desire for them. And what bhikkhus is the source and origin of sensual pleasures? Contact is their source and origin. And what is the diversity of sensual pleasures? Sensual pleasures for forms is one thing. Sensual pleasures for sounds is another. Sensual desire for odors is still another. Sensual desire for tastes, still another. And sensual desire for tactile objects, still another. This is called the diversity of sensual pleasures. And what is the result of sensual pleasures? One produces an individual existence that corresponds with whatever sense pleasures one desires, and which may be the consequence either of merit or demerit. This is called the result of sensual pleasures. And what is the cessation of sensual pleasures? With the cessation of contact, there is the cessation of sensual pleasures. This Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the cessation of sensual pleasures, namely right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness. When bhikkhus, a noble disciple, thus understands sensual pleasures, the source and origin of sensual pleasures, the diversity of sensual pleasures, the result of sensual pleasures, the cessation of sensual pleasures, and the way leading to the cessation of sensual pleasures, he understands this penetrative spiritual life to be the cessation of sensual pleasure. When it was said, sensual pleasures should be understood, and the way leading to the cessation of sensual pleasure should be understood, it is because of this that this was said. When it was said, feelings should be understood, and the way leading to the cessation of feelings should be understood, for what reason was this said? There are bhikkhus, these three feelings: pleasant feeling, painful feeling, and neither painful nor pleasant feeling. And what is the source and origin of feelings? Contact is their source and origin. And what is the diversity of feelings? There is worldly pleasant feeling. There is spiritual pleasant feeling. There is worldly painful feeling. There is spiritual painful feeling. There is worldly neither painful nor pleasant feeling. There is spiritual neither painful nor pleasant feeling. This is called the diversity of feelings. And what is the result of feelings? One produces an individual existence that corresponds with whatever feelings one experiences, and which may be the consequence either of merit or demerit. This is called the result of feelings. And what is the cessation of feelings? With the cessation of contact, there is the cessation of feelings. This Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the cessation of feelings, namely right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness. When bhikkhus, a noble disciple, thus understands feeling, the source and origin of feelings, the diversity of feelings, the result of feelings, the cessation of feelings, and the way leading to the cessation of feelings, he understands this penetrative spiritual life to be the cessation of feelings. When it was said feelings should be understood, and the way leading to the cessation of feelings should be understood, it is because of this that this was said. When it was said perceptions should be understood, and the way leading to the cessation of perceptions should be understood, for what reason was this said? There are bhikkhus these 6 perceptions: perception of forms, perception of sounds, perception of odors, perception of tastes, perception of tactile objects, perception of mental phenomena. And what is the source and origin of perceptions? Contact is their source and origin. And what is the diversity of perceptions? The perception of forms is one thing. The perception of sounds is another. The perception of odors, still another. The perception of tastes, still another. The perception of tactile objects, still another. And the perception of mental phenomena, still another. This is called the diversity of perceptions. And what is the result of perceptions? I say that perceptions result in expression. In whatever way one perceives something, in just that way one expresses oneself, saying, I was percipient of such and such. This is called the result of perception. And what is the cessation of perceptions? With the cessation of contact, there is cessation of perceptions. This Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the cessation of perceptions. When bhikkhus, a noble disciple, thus understands perceptions, the source and origin of perceptions, the diversity of perceptions, the result of perceptions, the cessation of perceptions, and the way leading to the cessation of perceptions, he understands this penetrative spiritual life to be the cessation of perceptions. When it was said perceptions should be understood, the way leading to the cessation of perceptions should be understood. It is because of this that this was said. When it was said the taints should be understood, the way leading to the cessation of the taints should be understood. For what reason was this said? There are bhikkhus these 3 taints: the taint of sensuality, the taint of existence, and the taint of ignorance. And what is the source and origin of the taints? Ignorance is their source and origin. And what is the diversity of the taints? There are taints leading to hell. There are taints leading to the animal realm. There are taints leading to the realm of afflicted spirits. There are taints leading to the human world. There are taints leading to the Deva world. This is called the diversity of the taints. And what is the result of the taints? One immersed in ignorance produces a corresponding individual existence, which may be the consequence either of merit or demerit. This is called the result of the taints. And what is the cessation of the taints? With the cessation of ignorance, there is cessation of the taints. This Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the cessation of the taints. When bhikkhus, a noble disciple, understands the taints, the source and origin of the taints, the diversity of the taints, the result of the taints, the cessation of the taints, and the way leading to the cessation of the taints, he understands this penetrative spiritual life to be the cessation of the taints. When it was said, the taints should be understood, and the way leading to the cessation of the taints should be understood, it is because of this that this was said. When it was said, Kamma should be understood, and the way leading to the cessation of Kamma should be understood. For what reason was this said? It is intention, bhikkhus, that I call Kamma. For having willed, one acts by body, speech, or mind. And what is the source and origin of Kamma? Contact is its source and origin. And what is the diversity of Kamma? There is Kamma to be experienced in hell, Kamma to be experienced in the animal realm, Kamma to be experienced in the realm of afflicted spirits, Kamma to be experienced in the human world, and there is Kamma to be experienced in the Deva world. This is called the diversity of Kamma. And what is the result of Kamma? The result of Kamma, I say, is threefold: to be experienced in this very life, or in the next rebirth, or on some subsequent occasion. This is called the result of Kamma. And what bhikkhus is the cessation of Kamma? With the cessation of contact, there is cessation of Kamma. This Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the cessation of Kamma. When bhikkhus, a noble disciple, thus understands Kamma, the source and origin of Kamma, the diversity of Kamma, the result of Kamma, the cessation of Kamma, and the way leading to the cessation of Kamma, he understands this penetrative spiritual life to be the cessation of Kamma. When it was said, Kamma should be understood, the way leading to the cessation of Kamma should be understood, it is because of this that this was said. When it was said, suffering should be understood, the source and origin of suffering should be understood, the diversity of suffering should be understood, the result of suffering should be understood, the cessation of suffering should be understood, the way leading to the cessation of suffering should be understood. For what reason was this said? Birth is suffering, old age is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, dejection, and anguish are suffering. Not to get what one wants is suffering. In brief, the five aggregates subject to clinging are suffering. And what is the source and origin of suffering? Craving is its source and origin. And what is the diversity of suffering? There is extreme suffering. There is slight suffering. There is suffering that fades away slowly. There is suffering that fades away quickly. This is called the diversity of suffering. And what is the result of suffering? Here, someone overcome by suffering, with a mind obsessed by it, sorrows, languishes, and laments. He weeps, beating his breast, and becomes confused. Or else, overcome by suffering, with the mind obsessed by it, he embarks upon a search outside, saying, "Who knows one or two words for putting an end to this suffering?" Suffering, I say, results either in confusion or in a search. This is called the result of suffering. And what is the cessation of suffering? With the cessation of craving, there is cessation of suffering. This noble eightfold path is the way leading to the cessation of suffering. When bhikkhus, a noble disciple, thus understands suffering, the source and origin of suffering, the diversity of suffering, the result of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the way leading to the cessation of suffering, he understands his penetrative spiritual life to be the cessation of suffering. When it was said suffering should be understood, the way leading to the cessation of suffering should be understood, it is because of this that this was said. This, bhikkhus, is that penetrative exposition of the Dhamma. Now I am going to continue reading on the next sutta. And this is from the Anguttara Nikaya, the Numerical Discourses, and it's from the Book of the Threes, and it's number 74, number 4, called the Niganta. On one occasion, the Venerable Ananda was dwelling at Vesali in the hall with the peaked roof in the great wood. Then the Lichavi Abhaya and the Lichavi Pandita Kumara approached the Venerable Ananda, paid homage to him, and sat down to one side. The Lichavi Abhaya then said to the Venerable Ananda, "Bhante, the Niganta Nataputta claims to be all-knowing and all-seeing, and to have all-embracing knowledge and vision, saying, 'When I am walking, standing, sleeping, and awake, knowledge and vision are constantly and continuously present to me.' He prescribes the termination of old karmas by means of austerity, and the demolition of the bridge by not creating any new karma. Thus, through the destruction of karma, suffering is destroyed. Through the destruction of karma, through the destruction of suffering, feeling is destroyed. Through the destruction of feeling, all suffering will be worn away. In this way, the overcoming of suffering takes place through this directly visible purification by wearing away." What does the Blessed One say about this? Abhaya: these three kinds of wearing away purification have been properly expounded by the Blessed One, the Arahat, the perfectly enlightened. One who knows and sees for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the passing away of pain and dejection, for the achievement of the method, for the realization of Nibbana. What three? Here, Abhaya, a bhikkhu is virtuous. Having undertaken the training rules, he trains in them. He does not create any new karma, and he terminates the old karma, having contacted it again and again. The wearing away is directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise. When, Abhaya, this bhikkhu is thus accomplished in virtuous behavior, secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, he enters and dwells in the first jhana, in the second jhana, in the third jhana, and then the fourth jhana. And in that, he does not create any new karma, and he terminates the old karma having contacted it again and again. The wearing away is directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise. When abhaya, this bhikkhu is thus accomplished in virtuous behavior and concentration, then with the destruction of the taints, he realizes for himself with direct knowledge, in this very life, the taintless liberation of mind, liberation by wisdom, and having entered upon it, he dwells in it. He does not create any new karma, and he terminates the old karma, having contacted it again and again. The wearing away is directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, applicable, to be personally experienced by the wise. These abhaya are the three kinds of wearing away purification that have been properly expounded by the Blessed One, the Arahat, the perfectly enlightened one, who knows and sees for the purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the passing away of pain and dejection, for the achievement of the method, for the realization of Nibbana. When this was said, the Lichavi Pandita Kumara said to the Lichavi Abhaya, "Why, friend Abhaya, don't you thank the Venerable Ananda for this well-stated words?" "How, friend, could I not thank the Venerable Ananda for his well-stated words? If one were not to thank the Venerable Ananda for his well-stated words, one's head would split apart." Now I am going to read from the Samyutta Nikaya, the Connected Discourses, and this is part 5, the Book of the Six Sense Bases, and it is in section 5 called New and Old, and it is number 146, number 1, Kamma. Bhikkhus, I will teach you new and old karma, the cessation of karma, and the way leading to the cessation of karma. Listen to that and attend closely, I will speak. And what, bhikkhus, is old karma? The I is old karma, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt. The year is old karma, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt. The nose is old karma, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt. The tongue is old karma, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt. The body is old karma, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt. The mind is old karma, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt. This is called old karma. And what, bhikkhus, is new karma? Whatever action one does now, by body, speech, or mind, this is called new karma. And what, bhikkhus, is the cessation of karma? When one reaches liberation through the cessation of bodily action, verbal action, and mental action, this is called the cessation of karma. And what, bhikkhus, is the way leading to the cessation of karma? It is this Noble Eightfold Path, that is right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right collectedness. Thus, bhikkhus, I have taught old karma, I have taught new Kamma. I have taught the cessation of Kamma. I have taught the way leading to the cessation of Kamma. Whatever should be done, bhikkhus, by a compassionate teacher out of compassion for his disciples, desiring their welfare, that I have done for you. These are the feet of trees, bhikkhus. These are empty huts. Meditate, bhikkhus, do not be negligent, lest you regret it later. This is our instruction to you. And now finally, I am going to read from part 4, the book of the Six Sense Bases, the same book. And this is section 6, called Kamabhu. On one occasion, the Venerable Kamabhu was dwelling at Machika Sanda in the wild mango grove. Then Chitta, the householder, approached the Venerable Kamabhu, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and said to him, Venerable Sir, how many kinds of formations are there? There are, householder, 3 kinds of formations: the bodily formation, the verbal formation, and the mental formation. Good, Venerable Sir, the Chitta, the householder, said. Then, having delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Kamabhu's statement, he asked him a further question. But, Venerable Sir, what is the bodily formation? What is the verbal formation? What is the mental formation? In-breathing and out-breathing, householder, are the bodily formation. Thought and examination are the verbal formation. Perception and feeling are the mental formation. Good, Venerable Sir, Chitta, the householder, said. Then he asked him a further question. But, Venerable Sir, why are in-breathing and out-breathing the bodily formation? Why are thought and examination the verbal formation? Why are perception and feeling the mental formation? Householder, in-breathing and out-breathing are bodily. These things are dependent upon the body. That is why in-breathing and out-breathing are the bodily formation. First one thinks and examines, then afterwards one breaks into speech. That is why thought and examination are the verbal formation. Perception and feeling are mental. These things are dependent upon the mind. That is why perception and feeling are the mental formation. Saying, Good, Venerable Sir, he then asked him a further question. Venerable Sir, how does the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling come about? Householder, when a bhikkhu is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, it does not occur to him, I will attain the cessation of perception and feeling, or I am attaining the perception of the cessation of perception and feeling, or I have attained the cessation of perception and feeling. But rather, his mind has previously been developed in such a way that it leads him to such a state. Saying, Good, Venerable Sir, he then asked him a further question. Venerable Sir, when a bhikkhu is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, which of these things ceases first in him? The bodily formation, the verbal formation, or the mental formation? Householder, when a bhikkhu is attaining the cessation of perception and feeling, first the verbal formation ceases, after that the bodily formation, and after that the mental formation. Saying, Good, Venerable Sir, he then asked him a further question. Venerable Sir, what is the difference between one who is dead and gone and a bhikkhu who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling? Householder, in the case of one who is dead and gone, the bodily formation has ceased and subsided. The verbal formations has ceased and subsided, and the mental formation has ceased and subsided. His vitality is extinguished. His physical heat has been dissipated. and his faculties are fully broken up. In the case of a bhikkhu who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling, the bodily formation has ceased and subsided. The verbal formation has ceased and subsided. The mental formation has ceased and subsided. But his vitality is not extinguished. His physical heat has not been dissipated, and his faculties are serene. This is the difference between one who is dead and gone and a bhikkhu who has attained the cessation of perception and feeling. Saying, "Good, Venerable Sir," he then asked him a further question. "Venerable Sir, how does one emerge from the cessation of perception and feeling?" Venerable Sir, how does emergence from the cessation of perception and feeling come about? Householder, when a bhikkhu is emerging from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, it does not occur to him, "I will emerge from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling," or "I am emerging from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling," or "I have emerged from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling." But rather, his mind has previously been developed in such a way that it leads him to such a state. Saying, "Good, Venerable Sir," he then asked him a further question. "Venerable Sir, when a bhikkhu is emerging from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, which of these things arises in him first? The bodily formation, the verbal formation, or the mental formation?" Householder, when a bhikkhu is emerging from the attainment of the perception of the cessation of perception and feeling, first the mental formation arises. After that, the bodily formation, and after that, the verbal formation. Saying, "Good, Venerable Sir," he then asked him a further question. "Venerable Sir, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, how many kinds of contact touch him?" Householder, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, 3 kinds of contact touch him: emptiness contact, signless contact, and undirected contact. Saying, "Good, Venerable Sir," he then asked him a further question. "Venerable Sir, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, towards what does his mind slant, slope, and incline?" Householder, when a bhikkhu has emerged from the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, his mind slants, slopes, and inclines towards seclusion. "Good, Venerable Sir," the Chitta, the householder, said. Then, having delighted and rejoiced in the Venerable Kamabu's statement, he asked him a further question. "Venerable Sir, how many things are helpful for the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling?" Indeed, householder, you are asking last what should have been asked first. But still I will answer you. For the attainment of the cessation of perception and feeling, 2 things are helpful: serenity and insight. So obviously those were quite a lot of reading to be done, but within the framework of this understanding of Kamma and how it relates to meditation, and especially the attainment of cessation of perception and feeling and what happens afterwards, it's important to have all of this information. Now let's unwound all of this and come to that understanding. First, it's important to understand that Kamma is not deterministic. There is no predetermination in the Buddha's dispensation. It all arises through karma that occurs in every present moment in which choices are provided to us. So there is one more sutta which I will only refer to so you understand, and it's called To Sivaka. And in it, the Buddha basically says that karma is not all. Karma is not everything that determines the actions of a person or the present state of a person. In other words, it's not just karma in the sense of a predeterministic karma that determines or decides the fate of an individual being. Karma is interwoven through the various different factors and causes and conditions, and primarily the components of things related to where a being is born in terms of the geography and climate, the sort of imbalances that might be there in the body of that individual, and the way that the climate, the body, the genetics, and so on and so forth all interact with one another. And this is, of course, felt at the level of contact and feeling and perception, but how one chooses to act is determined rather by how one chooses to perceive what is experienced or what is felt in every given moment. And that is why our choices are what conditioned through the level of contact whether one produces new karma by, number one, personalizing what is felt and therefore wanting more of it or wanting less of it, and secondly, through the taints of ignorance and being and sensual craving, which determines then our choices, in that we tend towards things that we believe will provide us lasting happiness and is permanent and therefore something that satisfies a sense of self. Or we can choose to understand with mindfulness and right effort or effective observation and effective application that what is arising, though it might be unwholesome or even something that might be pleasing to the senses, they themselves are not the cause of the craving. The cause of the craving is how one takes it. One can experience what is felt and let it alone and let it be, because then there won't be any personalization which will cause the craving to arise and further clinging and being and so on and so forth down the links of dependent origination. So it's important to understand through this context that whatever is experienced through our previous choices that are made. And these choices then create the next set of the links of dependent origination, at which point they either strengthen certain formations that are fettered and hindered by ignorance, by craving, and by conceit, or they condition and weaken those particular formations that are fettered and hindered by those defilements or projections, and therefore one wears away the fetters gradually through the choices one makes that are rooted in wholesomeness, that are rooted in the Eightfold Path. Why is it said that the Eightfold Path is the cessation of suffering, the cessation of contact, the cessation of feeling, the cessation of perception, and the cessation of karma? That's because whenever one acts in alignment with the Eightfold Path, one is acting in accordance with that which will condition the formations in a way that roots out the fetters in them, which bit by bit destroys the ignorance and therefore the conceit and therefore the craving. And whenever one acts in accordance with the Eightfold Path, one is using altogether the tools that are within that path, namely understanding through right view, first on an intellectual level, that there is karma, that there is rebirth, that there is the Four Noble Truths, and then applying that by making choices that are rooted in right intention, namely the choice to let go of things, the choice of renunciation, the choice to cultivate harmlessness, or the ability to cultivate the Brahma Viharas. And then from that standpoint, act or speak or behave or think in a way that it produces no harm to anyone, including oneself. And by doing that, what is then done is the being then experiences the karma or the effects of previous choices, but then in understanding the process of letting go, in the case of using right effort or effective application, where something wholesome or unwholesome, something unwholesome arises rather, which can be the roots of craving to take something personal that is felt, and then understand that there is craving arising, or even before that, abandon and prevent that craving from arising, and then bring up a wholesome state of mind, a wholesome quality of mind. And this is done through having effective observation, understanding, and having the mindfulness to be present in every choice that is going to be made, and knowing and understanding that one choice leads to suffering and the other choice invariably in some way or another leads to Nibbana. And how is this done? If this choice leads to Nibbana, how is that the case? This is because every time you act in accordance with the Eightfold Path, you are further developing the mind through mindfulness and collectedness. You're further creating the foundations by following the precepts, which helps to prevent certain hindrances to arise, clarifies the mind. It basically allows the mind to come into the meditation already to some extent clarified and purified, able to quickly generate the factors of jhana by effectively observing one's object or vehicle of meditation, which in this case is one of the Brahma Viharas. So it all works in sync and in alignment to be able to then develop this effective collectedness, or this right collectedness, to go through each of the jhanas. And whenever you are in alignment with the Eightfold Path, which culminates in the jhana practice, you are effectively experiencing, if you do, the hindrances and then letting go of them, and thereby actually experiencing old karma and letting go of that old karma, and then coming back to the jhana factors, coming back through your object of meditation to get back into that jhana. And by doing that, you produce no new karma. You then generate or condition and strengthen certain formations while weakening the formations that are rooted in craving, conceit, and ignorance. And as you weaken those formations, and as you strengthen the formations that help you to create better choices in daily living while practicing right effort or effective application within the meditation process, this will have an effect on the daily living and vice versa. As you continually produce choices that are rooted in right view, understanding that if there's a choice that you make out of craving, it will produce suffering, and then apply the Four Noble Truths to let go of that craving and come back to a peaceful mind, come back to mindfulness, come back to collectedness, you are then further deteriorating the formations hindered and fettered by the defilements, by the projections. And as you get deeper into the jhana practice, there comes a point, as was mentioned in the last sutta, where you start to subside and cease the various formations, namely the verbal formations, because thinking and applying thought are let go of in the second jhana. And while certain thoughts may arise, they are not verbal thoughts. Try to notice this when you are in jhana. If certain distractions arise, they may be primarily image-based thoughts. And there may be background wisps of verbal formations, but they are not attended to. And they do not dominate the mind. But slowly, bit by bit, they will completely cease and subside. But what still remains, if there are in the way of distractions, are certain imageries which come from the mental formations of feeling and perception. That is the contact of mind and mind objects. So as you go deeper into the fourth jhana and so on, what happens is that the body starts to calm down. You start to lose some sense of awareness with the body, or you have a sense of expansion of the body. And the breathing for certain periods of time may actually even stop, but more primarily it will slow down to quite a great extent. And you will start noticing that your breathing starts to get shorter and shorter, but also gets elongated in the form of having to take less breaths in between each breath, in between each exhalation and inhalation. So the oxygen consumption has basically been affected in that regard. So in the fourth jhana onwards, your bodily formations in that regard starts to cease. Of course, they completely cease at cessation of perception and feeling, but while they may still be there in higher jhanas, they are, for the most part, almost imperceptible, unless you pay attention to it, unless you put your attention to it, and then when you do that, you may get distracted, but basically then use the 6R process to come back to your object or vehicle of meditation. And then finally, as you get higher and higher into the jhanas, up to the level of nothingness, you start to see that you are working with formations themselves. The infinite consciousnesses subside and you penetrate between each consciousness to the level of nothingness. And as you let go of the concept of having been in nothingness, let go of the idea that you as a sense of self are in nothingness, you start to sink into the level of neither perception nor non-perception, where you are dealing with the formations as close to as when they arise and automatically letting go of them using the automated 6R process, and then coming to mind where it rests within itself. And when it rests within itself and you allow your mind to continue to unravel, continue to let go of these subtle formations, and where you are in neither perception nor non-perception, because the proto-perceptions, if you will, the perceptions that might arise, as soon as they arise and they go away, they have no chance to fully develop into full-fledged perceptions in that regard. So you let go of all of these things and stay with that tranquil mind. And this is the point where you play around with the balancing factors, with the 7 factors of awakening, to either bring a state of mind in which there is balance from sloth and torpor, in which case you use the factors of energy and interest, investigation and joy with mindfulness, or when you start to slope towards restlessness, in which case through mindfulness you also then use equanimity, tranquility, and collectedness. And this is done by subtle intention. Just as you are able to see that the mind is starting to slope one way, you intend the balancing factors allow that intention to unravel, and then see that the mind is coming back to itself in a balanced, collected manner, and continue with that bright, radiant, luminous, tranquil mind, the quiet mind. And the longer you stay here and the longer you sit with this mind, and the longer you allow the mind to unravel and let go of those subtle formations, that there will come a point where you will then enter, so to speak, the cessation of perception and feeling. And at that point of having let go of the subtlest formations, the mental formations completely cease. That is the perception and the feeling. And then, of course, the breathing altogether for a certain point of time while cessation is present. Now, when you emerge out of cessation of perception and feeling, what happens next is important to see that your mind remains unattached. Depending on which level, so to speak, you are at in terms of the awakening path and fruition, you will start to see, if you are in the beginning, the relief that ultimately arises at the level of contact. Here is how the process happens. The mind emerges from cessation of perception and feeling, and then the links of dependent origination arise. The formations arise that give way to a certain consciousness that then establish through the sixth sense bases. And primarily at the level of mind, there is the contact with the Nibbana element. There is the contact, the empty contact, the emptiness contact, the signless contact, and the contact that is undirected, which means at that level of contact, there is, through the understanding of impermanence, the signless contact. Through the understanding of not self, the emptiness contact, the void contact. And through the understanding of suffering by not holding on to anything, the undirected contact. And this all happens without any involvement from a sense of self. But then invariably there is the feeling of having let go to such an extent and then experiencing Nibbana at that level of contact, that there is the feeling of great, vast relief. And then when that relief arises, there is, depending on the level of awakening, as I said, either the attachment of a sense of self, in which case there is then the rest of the links now coming to be from craving onwards, or the understanding that this feeling of relief is not self, and the letting go of that feeling, seeing through it, and invariably and ultimately destroying craving altogether. Because one has fully penetrated the Four Noble Truths, understanding that craving is the root cause of suffering, and therefore will no longer personalize any contact, any feeling, any consciousness, any perception, any aspect of mentality and materiality, and any formations. In essence, no longer having the clinging aspect of the five aggregates, no longer personalizing the five aggregates, no longer identifying with the five aggregates, and allowing that relief to be understood as it is, that it is merely a feeling, merely a sensation, and how one perceives it and how one takes it is what determines whether craving will arise or not arise. It is the intention of taking that personal by delighting in it with a personal sense of self that creates the craving, and therefore will continue to create new karma. But having destroyed conceit, having destroyed ignorance by penetrating the Four Noble Truths, and by having understood and penetrated what and how craving arises, one lets completely go of the relief, sees through it, understands it as it is, and does not delight in it, does not personalize it, does not take it to be self, and has, through that experience, dropped any fetters and all fetters, destroyed the taints or projections, because one no longer grasps. And by not grasping, has therefore destroyed the taints and attained arahatship. So once that happens, it is right view, the elevated right view, that replaces ignorance. And therefore any formations that then arise are arisen from contact, having made contact with the outside world, with the various six sense spaces internally, with their external forms, sounds, odors, the tastes, the tangibles, and of course the mental objects within the mind. It is contact with these that then will condition or give rise to formations, because it is at the level of contact that the old karma is experienced. But because the arahat no longer will personalize or identify with that old karma at the level of contact, feeling, and perception, it is right there and then that old karma is worn away, is terminated. It could be that it might require more wearing away in the sense of allowing it to be felt over and over. But in the experience of having felt it over and over, because there's no reaction that is based in craving, that is based in personalizing and identifying, no new karma will arise. So it is karma in that sense, the old karma, the effects of previous choices that were created prior to full awakening, that continue to be seen through, to be experienced, and then finally let go of, and finally understood to be not self, and finally understood that this is not to be taken personally, and therefore is worn away. This is also applied in the meditation practice. There is no sense of I, me, or mine within the meditation in relation to the factors of the jhanas, or in relation to experiencing the meditation, of entering the meditation, or coming out of the meditation. So in the case of jhana practice, whenever there is a hindrance arising, consider that to be old karma. Consider that to be karma that needs to be let go of. And instead of reacting in a way that personalizes it, by trying to push it away, by trying to feed it with your attention, let it go so that you produce no new karma. And more importantly, once you come back to your vehicle of meditation, don't push the mind to be with that object of meditation, because that in effect creates new karma, which will give rise to further hindrances. So it is within the meditation practice that you are understanding how to let go of old karma by not producing new karma, by effectively using effective observation, effective application, and coming into effective collectedness. And when you do this, it's important not to identify it by not pushing the object, not pushing the mind to be with that object, and not pushing down the hindrances. Let go and observe. These are the two things that need to be done. In letting go, you are practicing insight, because you understand that this is not me, this is not mine, this is not myself. And you are then allowing the mind to let go of it, and then come back to the observation of the object. And by doing so, you are practicing serenity. This is the samatha vipassana, serenity and insight. Observing is serenity, and letting go with understanding is insight. And when you have these two and you continue to do this for as long as you can and stretch that out towards higher levels of meditation through the jhana practice, you inevitably come to cessation of perception and feeling, and will inevitably attain and understand and experience Nibbana.
In the jhana practice, even if one does not attain the cessation and does not remove one of the fetters, you're still nullifying, if that's the right expression, the old kamma, and hence you're clarifying and developing your mind in a wholesome way. Is that a correct statement?
That's correct. That's exactly it. Because the nullifying of kamma always happens at the level of contact and feeling, where you choose to either take it personal, and so in the context of the meditation, you choose to take that hindrance, which is the old kamma, that arises, and then try to push it and fight with it, or ignore it and let it continue to unravel by taking it personal, by trying to ignore it from that level of taking it personal, instead of facing it, actually allowing it to be there as it is, and then letting go of it and relaxing the tension, which is the result of the craving that may arise from it. So when you do that, you are not producing any new kamma, but you are reconditioning the formations in such a way that will automatically, or almost automatically, continue to let go of those hindrances, both in the meditation and in daily living.
And is it then a correct statement to state that the time and duration it takes one's mind to get to any level of attainment is determined by the way one is practicing right effort or the 6 R's, but also by the amount and, I would almost say, severity of old kamma. What I mean by that is that if one has a wholesome past with good kamma being created, it would be reasonable to assume, in my mind, to state that that mind with the right level of effort would be able to attain any attainment quicker than a mind who's having a lot of unwholesome kamma from the past.
Yeah.
Is that also correct?
Yeah, that is correct, because when we look at the hindrances when they arise, primarily the 5 hindrances, they are related inversely to the 5 precepts. And the 5 precepts are rooted in the Eightfold Path, meaning it is all about committing right action, committing right speech, and committing or having right livelihood. So when you continue to keep your precepts, you will notice that the mind starts to become calmer much quicker. Whereas if you break a precept, you will see that in your mind there is disturbances through the hindrances. So it is right to say that one who continues to maintain the precepts will have a better meditation practice in that regard, and will have the ability to achieve higher states much quicker, and finally attain Nibbana much quicker. So if you continue to keep the precepts, you will start to notice this in your practice. That's not to say that if you do maintain your precepts now, you make a determination to maintain your precepts, that the effects of having broken the precepts in a previous choice will not take effect within the meditation. It's not like you confess and now you maintain the precepts and now you're absolved. The effects of that karma of having broken the precept will be experienced, whether it is in daily life, through the mental plane in which you may be disturbed and how you respond or react to situations in daily life, or they may take effect in the meditation practice itself, in both cases, you have to let go of them. You have to understand that they are there, understand that they have arisen, and then let go of them and let go of the craving to try to deal with them, and then come back to a wholesome state, which in the context of the meditation would be one of the Brahma Viharas, or the tranquil mind, or in the case of daily living, to have the intention of being in a wholesome state, or the intention of projecting and radiating out one of the Brahma Viharas, or being in a state of clarity, whatever it might be.
The question is the following, that in case of a mind which has released the majority of the fetters, like an anagami or an arahat, in that case, there's still contact, perception, and feeling. The question is if these contact, perception, and feeling will generate new formations. In other words, that the input that one is receiving from the senses, like somebody is speaking, somebody is doing a bodily action, will generate new formations, even though there will not be a sense of self attached to it, and even though those formations will be rooted in affective vision.
The formations then of themselves will arise through the level of contact. Yes, they will determine what formations arise. But in the level of an anagami, for example, you have the capacity to take it personal through conceit, because there's still the fetter of conceit. So it will actually produce not necessarily new formations, but new karma, which will then produce new formations. Whereas in the level of an arahat, because they have destroyed all sense of being, of personal being, the formations that will arise will be rooted in right view. So because they are always acting from the Noble Eightfold Path, and because right view is what then conditions the formations, it's a matter of taking the contact itself as impersonal, taking the contact itself as suffering, and therefore not holding on to, and taking that contact as impermanent. So whenever that contact arises, because at that moment of contact, that such a mind of an arahat will take it to be impersonal, impermanent, and suffering, will not even let go, because they have understood with wisdom that there's nothing worth holding on to. The mind won't abide in it. So the formations that will arise will be in response to it, rather than creating new formations, which are always created through the fetters and the defilements of craving, being, and ignorance. So in that case, as an example, if a negative situation arose at the level of a released mind, because of the right view that is, so to speak, installed through having continuously strengthened the formations that continue to be conditioned by right view, and continuously weakening and then finally rooting out the fettered and hindered formations, which are conditioned by the taints or the projections. When that negative situation arises, because of that, the being will respond from right view, respond from right intention, will respond in a way that will not produce new karma and therefore will not produce new formations. It's a matter of letting go of the old formations, ultimately.
No more questions.
All right, let's hear some merit then.
Shall we share merit?
Yes.
May the suffering ones be suffering free, and the fear-struck fearless be. May the grieving shed all grief, and may all beings find relief. May all beings share this merit that we have thus acquired for the acquisition of all kinds of happiness. May beings inhabiting space and earth, devas and nagas of mighty power, share this merit of ours. May they long protect the Buddha's dispensation. Dhadu, dhadu, dhadu.